going to show you how to work wrap and turn short rows in knitting and how to finish them by picking up the wraps. I'll show you both in stockinette and a different stitch pattern. In these two examples, the short row sections have been made in different colors to make it easier to see. Short rows can be used to create a slope or wedge shape by not working all of the stitches in a row before turning and working the next row. Short rows can be used in lots of places for shaping. In this sweater pattern alone, there are short rows shaping the top-down sleeve cap, shaping the slope of the shoulder, and shaping the collar so it sits higher at the back neck. So here's how to work wrap and turn short rows. There are two parts to this. First, the wrap and turn part, and then later picking up the wraps. First, we'll do a wrap and turn on a right side row in stockinette. Work in pattern until you get to where your knitting pattern says to wrap and turn. I'll pretend that's here on this sample. Slip the next stitch purlwise to the right needle, then move the working yarn around between the needles to the front of the work, and now slip that stitch back to the left needle, and now move the working yarn back between the needles to the back of the work, returning it to the original position before you begin wrapping the stitch. You can see you've wrapped the working yarn around that stitch, so you're done with the wrap part of the wrap and turn. Now just carefully turn your work so that the wrong side is now facing you. And that's the turn part. So the wrap and turn is now complete, and you'll work this row as directed in your knitting pattern. Depending on your pattern, you might be working to the end of the row or working a certain number of stitches until you make another wrap and turn from the wrong side of the work. So that's what I'll do here to show you how to work a wrap and turn from the purl side. We'll pretend I've worked again until my pattern tells me to wrap and turn on this purl side. So same as on the knit side of the work, without changing the position of the working yarn, slip the next stitch purlwise to the right needle, then move the working yarn between the needles to the back of the work, and slip that stitch back to the left needle, and now move the working yarn back between the needles to the front of the work again, returning it to the original position you had it in before you began wrapping that stitch. And you've just wrapped this stitch, and so now you just turn your work to the opposite side. And now the wrap and turn from that side is complete. And again, you'll now just work this row as directed in your knitting pattern. The second part of any wrap and turn short row is picking up the wrap on a later row when you get to the wrap stitch. This will close up the little gap that you can see here next to the wrap stitch, and you can see that wrap just around the base of this stitch. You may not need to do this on the next immediate right side row, depending on the shaping in your pattern. But on the next right side row, when your pattern tells you to work up to a stitch that was wrapped and pick up the wrap and work it together with the wrapped stitch, here's how you do it. When you get to that wrapped stitch on your left needle, put your right needle tip through the wrap from the front and then through the first stitch on the left needle and knit them together as one. And that's it. You've now closed the gap made by your right side short row, and you would just continue this row as directed in pattern. And it's similar for your next wrong side row when you're instructed to work up to a stitch that was wrapped on a previous wrong side row and to pick up the wrap and work it together with the wrap stitch. That stitch is usually a little bit harder to see from the purl side, but you can see that wrap just around the base of this stitch. So when you get to that wrapped stitch on your left needle, insert your right needle tip into the back of that wrap and place it up onto the left needle, and then purl it together with that first stitch. Now you can actually do this motion in one move without lifting the wrap up onto the needle. If you're able to, you can just lift the wrap and go straight into that stitch and purl them together. But if you find that motion a little bit difficult, and it can be, just lift the wrap up onto the needle and purl them together that way. And you've now closed the gap made by your short row on this wrong or purl side. And you'll just continue your row in pattern as directed. Now here's my sample from the right side, and there's no gaps from where we worked our wrap and turn short rows. And you can see my sample has a bit of a slant on both sides because of those short rows. Working a wrap and turn short row is similar if you're working in a different stitch pattern and not just stockinette. You just need to keep in mind that you wrap and turn and pick up the wraps based on what stitches are needed to keep your knitting in your stitch pattern. In this example here, this is broken rib stitch, where every other stitch is a purl on the right side and the wrong side rows are all purled. So just like on stockinette rows, when you get to the stitch where you need to work a wrap and turn, and it doesn't matter what type of stitch it is, you slip that stitch to the right needle without moving the position of the working yarn. So the working yarn may be at the front or the back, depending on what the last stitch you worked was. Here my working yarn would be at the back since I last worked a knit stitch. So to start my wrap and turn, I slip the first stitch on the left needle to the right needle. I bring my working yarn to the front of the work. I slip that stitch back to the left needle and bring my working yarn to the back of the work again. And just turn the work to the opposite side, and the wrap and turn is done. Now I would just work this row according to my pattern. And I'll just work to the end so we can do another one. Now in this case, let's say I need to do another wrap and turn here, and you can see that my last stitch worked was a purl this time. So I leave the working yarn in the front of the work to begin my wrap and turn. So slip that stitch to the right needle, bring my working yarn to the back of the work, slip that stitch back to the left needle. And now normally I would bring my working yarn to the front again between the needles to finish wrapping that stitch. But I do want to pause to show you something here, because depending on what stitch you need to work after you turn, which I've just done here, your working yarn may not actually be in the correct position if you've got a stitch pattern going on here. So in this case, I need to purl this first stitch on my left needle, so my working yarn is at the back because I completed my wrap. So actually, I need it to be here at the front. So you can just move it into position, or if you prefer, you can just not complete moving that working yarn back to the original position before you turn. It's really up to you. Don't overthink it too much though, because basically all you need to know is that your working yarn, before you work this first stitch on the left needle, just needs to be in position for that. So move it if you need to. You can see though that because of this, it doesn't really look like I have fully wrapped this stitch yet. But don't worry about that, because after I work that full stitch, I've just basically completed the wrap in that move. And I'll show this to you from the right side of the work. So you can see that that stitch is indeed fully wrapped. So I'm just going to work in pattern to the end of the row, and we'll pick up the wraps. So now we need to pick up the wraps and work them together with the wrap stitches. And I have 2 wrap stitches in this row. Here's the first one we did when it was over a purl stitch, and here's the second one that we did when it was over a knit stitch. So in a stitch pattern, when it's time to pick up the wrap and work it with the stitch that's wrapped, you just do it according to whether or not that wrap stitch needs to be a purl or a knit in your stitch pattern. So if the stitch that was wrapped needs to be a knit stitch to stay in pattern, like this one, you'll work it like we did from a knit side row in stockinette. Insert the right needle tip into the base of that wrap from the front, and it might be a little bit tighter feeling depending on where your working yarn started when you initially wrapped that stitch. And then you'll insert it into the stitch that was wrapped, just like before, and you'll knit those 2 stitches together as one. If the stitch that was wrapped needs to be a purl stitch in pattern like this one, work it like we did when we did this on a purl side row in stockinette. Insert your right needle tip into the wrap from the back, which again might be a little bit tighter feeling depending on where your working yarn was when you started initially wrapping this stitch. Lift it up onto the needle and purl it together with that first stitch, or you can do that in one motion if you prefer. And then just continue in pattern.
And that's all there is to it. Check out one of these 2 videos, and I'll see you again soon for more knitting and sewing.